You're listening to the MPD Connect podcast, hosted by Public Information Officer Tim Aycock.
Well, thank you, sir, for coming to do this and take your time out of your busy schedule. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation. It's good to be here, as always, Chan.
Yeah, so you ready to get going?
Yeah, man.
All right.
Yeah, my name is Dr. Kareem Puranda. I'm a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I specialize in treating trauma and addictions. My primary population are people who come from underserved communities and law enforcement. The reason these environments are really important to me is because, number one, I grew up in the Bronx. I grew up in a disadvantaged community, and I know what it's like to persevere through those kind of challenges, create opportunities for myself, and I was able to get a football scholarship. Not before I messed up a lot. I was left back twice in the 10th grade, had a lot of challenges, behavioral challenges growing up, raised by a single mom, and the football scholarship saved my life. It got me out of New York. I came down south to a HBCU, down here, historically black college and university, and I graduated, became a police officer as a result of an inspirational person to me who was the first African-American chief for the agency that I worked at. He was a professor at the school as well, and I took one of his courses, and I took a liking to him. He took a liking to me and said, hey, man, you need to come on. And this is back around the time they were shifting the culture to community policing. This was the early 2000s, and the agency that I worked for was somewhat trying to catch up to that whole philosophy, and hiring more minorities was a part of the goal of the plan for that agency. And so that's how I ended up in law enforcement, man. And then, just going through it for 8 years, did it for 8 years until I ran into a lot of challenges with lawsuits and different things, just figuring out how to navigate it without adequate guides within the culture that says we don't ask for help when I really needed help. I suffered in silence, man. And as a result of it, when I left the profession, I finally went and got therapy, and that's what triggered me to now come into this profession as a clinical mental health counselor to try to help other officers demystify and educate them on social emotional intelligence needed to do this job effectively and make it to retirement.
So just in general terms of mental health for just all of us in general in America, do you hear, we're hearing more about it all the time. We need to have the health and wellness of our minds and our bodies, of course, but our minds are really becoming a point of focus. Do you think there's that much more issues in the public these days, or are we just hearing more about it because of social media and easier ways to communicate about it?
I think the second part, we're hearing more of it through social media. People have access to social media through YouTube and all the Instagrams and all that jazz to publicize their challenges, their stories, their perspectives. And as a result of it, we're getting more than just what's said in the household. And so there's more exposure to insights, perspectives, opinions regarding mental health. And as a result, more stories are being told. More people are exhibiting courage to talk about their stories in hopes of helping someone else, because for several reasons, it's a way to go viral. It's a way to get clicks. It's a way to potentially and genuinely help others. But sometimes the misuse of a apparatus can also be a benefit in some cases, where people are seeing that this thing called mental health is being normalized through so many people verbalizing what they're going through for whatever their motives are. The conversation around it demystifies it. And so it makes people question, hey, I wonder if I've got challenges going on that I need to go get checked out.
So overall, you think it's a good thing because we're talking about it more whether we kind of want to or not at this point?
Yeah,
okay.
That's right.
So what do you think is the biggest challenge for someone if they're like, okay, I think I may have a mental health issue? What is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, it's a variety of things, Tim. I tell you what, I believe mental health is a byproduct of systems. I'm talking about family systems. I'm talking about the education system, justice system, health system, all systems that you can think of eventually create a culture, which eventually becomes a set of beliefs. And mental health is nothing more than a belief. Take anxiety, for example. It's a perspective. When one starts to think or believe a certain way, they get emotionally triggered. And as a result, then they behave according to that pain point, that belief, those emotions. Sometimes it's not consistent with what the reality is. And so systems create challenges. If you got a child that comes from a system where the parents were not available to them in some capacity, either they were not physically available, or maybe they were there but not there emotionally and socially, or if the parent was toxic, if the parent was a narcissist, those things can create deficits in that child's character development that they take with them into adulthood. And there you have mental health challenges, for good or for worse, whatever it might be.
So, I know we're all bad about trying to self-diagnose ourselves. We got WebMD, we got YouTube, we have all these different ways to look at things and try to figure things out.
And ChatGPT nowadays.
Yeah, exactly.
Using that.
Exactly. So, as someone in your role that's so important these days, what would you tell someone about the signs to look for that they need to seek help or need to maybe ask someone about it?
Yeah, I like to always lead whenever I'm working with a patient. I always like to lead with, how are things working for you? And we can start with the ideas that they're using to create their quality of life. A lot of times what's causing someone's condition is a subscription to an idea that's inconsistent with their reality. Many people have a tendency, especially in law enforcement, to focus on the things that they cannot control with the assumption that they can control it. And when it doesn't go the way that they want it to go, that's what drives stress. That's what drives frustration, aggravation, and things like that. If you've never had the skill sets, if you were never armed with the skill sets to manage life on life terms, it's sort of kind of metaphorically like building a house with just a screwdriver and a crowbar. You don't have the right tools to manage this thing. And as a result, you're going to get frustrated. If you don't learn the tools that are required, you're going to make a shabby house, or the house is not going to be, it's going to be non-existent. Right. And so a lot of times it's symptoms associated with the sympathetic nervous system, where you don't eat well, you don't sleep well, you don't manage relationships well, you get a lot of anxiety around social engagements or connection engagements with people. You can't manage a relationship well. You may be functional at work, but in your personal life, things are just not going the best. And sometimes people who work 80 hours or more instead of 40, right, it's usually an indication, too, that they're running from something or avoiding something as well. People are trying to find different ways to cope, and sometimes the coping mechanisms are not the best. Alcohol, DUIs, domestic violence, infidelity, all of these are also symptoms of an emotional wound that needs to be treated. Right.
And that makes sense, too, just like the 80 hours a week, people that are overworking, they're just trying to keep their mind busy.
Yeah. Big time. It's not healthy at all.
And then going back to like the crowbar and the screwdriver, I would think that a lot of people, it would make them just kind of give up on that path.
Bingo. You got it. And then what happens after that? If I just can't use these tools, I'd rather give up on life. Right. Screw it.
I just go back to what I was doing.
Bingo.
Just hoping that it'll work at some point.
Bingo.
Which is the cycle of insanity, basically.
You got it, my brother. You got it.
I've known you too long.
Yeah, you got it.
All right. So when people are thinking about getting help, the thing we're always going to think about the crazy word, the C word. How do we break that stigma of to stop thinking like that? Because it's just not that simple anymore. There's a lot more layers to it.
Yeah, no question. I like to tell people, crazy people do not come to therapy. People who've been through crazy stuff come to therapy to figure out how to sort it out or how to manage life on life terms. And I think we've just been conditioned or institutionalized to believe that the very thing that could help us is the very thing that will hurt us. Think about it in law enforcement. It's this idea that if you say, hey, I got a problem or I got some issues out too loud, it may be considered career suicide. People might think, hey, you're crazy. You need to go see the shrink, get a fitness for duty evaluation. And the next thing you know, your gun and your badge is stripped from you because you're not mentally competent to do this job. When really, in fact, going to a therapist is designed to help you remain fit for duty, to help you make sure that you have the tools and the skill sets to navigate some of the stuff that you see, or maybe even some of the stuff you never addressed from your childhood that you brought into the profession with you. Right. And there's a lot of people that I've seen over these last couple of years that don't have the emotional vocabulary to say what it is they feel. And so they're just going around with this feeling that has no name, and they're allowing it to dictate how they show up in the world. They're making decisions from this feeling when this feeling is connected to a memory of their past that they have yet to explore. And that's what therapy does. It helps to demystify the things you don't currently know about you, to help you figure out who you are, to help you understand where you want to go in life, because so many people would say to me that come to therapy, I'm not where I want to be, simply because they've been following a loop, to your point earlier, that's not serving them or working for them. And therapy helps them to untangle that loop so that they can straighten it out and make progress.
And that's a perfect segue, because that's what I was going to ask you about, moving kind of from the general population just to officers specifically. that's the hardest thing I would think, because officers think, they're going to take my badge gun, they're going to put me on desk duty, whatever your department may do, and they're going to think I'm crazy. I'm never going to be fit for duty again. And what do you say to those officers that are struggling with that, just trying to seek some help?
Yeah, what I would tell you is that I was one of them once upon a time, and I looked at therapy as like something you hold a crucifix against and banish it, get away from me. I would never do that. Right. But the reality was I needed it. And here's a stat or a theory based upon research. An officer who knows that they need help and gets it is in a better predicament than the officer who knows that they need help but doesn't get it. I was that second officer. And as a result of that, what I like to call an untreated wound, emotional wound specifically, it becomes infected. And it looks like some of the things that I said earlier about like DUIs and domestic violence, can't maintain a relationship, discourteous complaints, excessive force complaints, up to the point of suicide. But by the time you start seeing these things manifest in an officer's career who's not asking for help, but indirectly they're saying that they need help based upon these outcomes, it's too late because so much damage has been done. Right. And so the goal is to normalize this process so that officers don't feel ashamed, because the shame is the number one driving factor that makes an officer say, "Nah, I'll just keep it suppressed," and they'll suffer in silence, which leads to the weight, carrying the weight of everything that compounds day after day. Every time you show up to a call where someone is ruining the moment, you're always called to the problems, right? And you got to remove the person that's ruining the moment, and sometimes that can have a lasting impression on you, and because you're always called to all the negative stuff, and so it compounds. Everything you brought into the profession, everything you've dealt with as a result of the profession continues to compound the longer you stay in the profession. And if you don't get that stuff dealt with, it becomes toxic and hard to manage later on down the road.
Yeah, because that's what I feel like, just in daily life, you say you drop something or you spill a water or whatever, and you have that moment like, man, you're just having a problem with it and you're frustrated, and that's kind of like not your flip out moment, but you're really frustrated, and then it really has nothing to do with that.
Bingo.
Stuff you haven't been dealing with from earlier that day or last week or whatever it may be. So
spot on.
Yeah, so we're stacking it up and not dealing with it like we should. Yeah.
Walking time bomb, ticking time bomb, whatever the terminology is. If you don't have a pressure release valve, and it can't be alcohol, it should not be alcohol, it should not be pornography, it should not be multiple relationships, it should not be working extra duty 24/7 like a full-time job. It shouldn't be finding something to distract you from.
Right.
It should be actually tackling the issue. No problem can be solved if you don't face it.
Right.
And so the goal is to make sure that you face the problem with adequate help, such as a therapist, or maybe someone you even trust, like maybe a spouse, someone that you can trust and confide in is also equally ideal, but a therapist, a trained professional is better.
And I've heard officers say too, they're leery of our own our EAP within our agencies.
Yeah,
because
no doubt.
they're going to tell somebody, and there's always this thing that's anonymous. All the jurisdictions go by the same policy, and it's hard to convince them of that it is truly anonymous.
Yes.
So what would you say to them that are worrying about that?
Yes, as an EAP provider, Employees Assistance Program provider, one that's a preferred option for most because of my background and experience, I would tell you that the process is confidential. No one knows what we talk about other than the person and the therapist in that moment. I do get the caution, though, especially if the recommendation comes from your agency that you need to go to this person, and if you have an issue with your agency or your agency heads, then it doesn't seem like good advice. I don't trust people who I don't trust, right? Why would I trust someone's advice who I don't trust? Right. And so there's that challenge or that barrier. But what I can tell you from an ethical and a fidelity standpoint, every therapist that does this line of work understands the impact and importance of maintaining confidentiality. I know in my office, what I always recommend or I share with the officers, typically when they come to me at the onset, is that nothing we talk about gets exposed outside of here unless you are expressing suicidal ideation where I have to report because I got to make sure you stay safe, homicidal ideation to protect other people. If there is someone from a vulnerable population being harmed, I got to report. Or if there's a court order of some kind, not a subpoena, but a court order is requested for me to release the records. Other than that, everything we talk about stays in between us. And even with the court orders, right, as a therapist, there's a certain level of discretion I have with how I write my notes on what we talked about on this day, not only just for clinical documentation purposes, but also to make sure that I remember what we spoke about in our last session. I keep the notes vague so that it still adds a layer of protection and confidentiality should the records be subpoenaed or court-ordered by someone outside of us.
I just saw this stat recently from a study, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, where it says the average person experiences between 3 and 5 traumatic events within their life. And an officer experiences anywhere from 400 to 800 throughout their career, depending on what their assignments are.
No question.
And I mean, I don't even know how to begin to wrap your mind around that as a therapist, how you, and you've lived that life too before.
Sure.
So how do you address that?
Yeah, here's the thing. The human beings that put on the badge and the uniform came from that population of average human beings once upon a time. They went through a training that was designed to institutionalize them or train them according to the culture or according to the profession and prepare them for what they're going to meet as best as the training can. Training does an adequate job of educating officers how to stay alive against external threats, but it never gives them enough tools to manage the potential internal threats that come from the exposure to all those traumas that they have to contend with. Most agency cultures are idealistically, it's about executing the mission and objectives over the way you feel. And so officers learn quickly, typically in BLET or basic law enforcement training, to, all right, I got to swallow this because this comes with the job. I got to make it look like I can handle it, even though I can't, because I'm human.
Suck it up.
I got to, I got to act like, or if I forget about it long enough, maybe it'll go away.
Right.
And, we all know that that's not true. And so these traumas are expected because you are the ones that civilians rely upon to come take care of the person or the thing that's causing our situation to be ruined. Come fix this problem, right, that we're all having that we don't know how to fix ourselves. And you have to be that one solution to all problems. And that's a lot of weight for a person to carry. It's not easy, but everybody has their coping mechanism. There's no right or wrong coping mechanism as long as it works for you. And that includes officers that may even be using alcohol to cope, to let out some of the pressure that's built up that they don't want to face. It's not the healthiest thing to do, and I wouldn't advise it, but for some officers, it works. I know officers that have been doing it for years, that, when they get off work, they throw back a couple shots. What they call a couple shots usually is a whole bottle of something, and that's how they take the edge off, and they're functional, and they're functional addicts, and it works for their career, and they've been in the career 25 plus years.
They're just storing that away for later, though. It's going to come out at some point, right? They got to deal with it.
It's going to, man, especially when retirement comes around.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you, because I think a lot of people think, well, I made it through retirement, man. That's my goal. I made it. Thank God I made
accomplishment.
it. Yeah. But then they think all that's going to go away. All the trauma and everything's going to wash away when they turn their stuff in and they go live the retirement life. How important is it for them to really, to keep focusing on their mental health even after they retire, or maybe even more sometimes, because that's when all that stuff's really going to start unraveling itself?
Yeah. I know a couple guys that are retired that I see and I support. You take you everywhere you go. And when you take you everywhere you go, you take all your memories, all that baggage, all the life stuff with you where you go. And there comes a point in your life or in your day where you're sitting still, there's nothing else going on, especially in retirement, and these thoughts flood your brain. Could have been something you saw on television, could have been something you heard, you saw a color, you smelt a smell, and next thing you know, you're back into this invasive thought of what happened back 20 years ago or 15 years ago of a traumatic event. And then what do? Again, people have the skill sets to either detach and keep going, act like it's not there, or they'll drown it out, or they'll medicate it out with some type of mind and mood-altering substance, be it a prescription or something that they found somewhere else to help deal with it. But the healthiest way to deal with the problem is directly. And the goal in any kind of therapeutic modality is to figure out alternative ways to cope with a situation that's healthier than the one that may have been used naturally or organically from the trauma.
Right. So I saw another recent study where the stats said that the police suicide rate is 54% higher than the general population. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's an unfortunate topic, but I think since we're putting it all out there, we got to put it out there. It's got to be talked about because those numbers seem to, like, locally, we're affected heavily now.
Absolutely. Yes, it's. I want to say within the last decade or so, there have been over 1,200 officer deaths by suicide and counting. And I think a byproduct of that number, it being the leading cause of what's taking officers out, is because officers are not adequately prepared in their training on how to deal with the psychological and emotional ramifications or the aftershock of a traumatic event. If you got some officers that are coming out of their childhood unprepared to manage life, they were not prepared to handle adulthood, and they're now putting on a badge and a uniform, then they got to deal with all this trauma and all these calls that require a responsible and a reasonable person to help with the solutions of what's ruining this particular event. Right. That compounds. Yeah. Again, building that house with that screwdriver and that crowbar. That's what we're talking about. And officers who don't feel comfortable asking for help because the culture or the system says you're supposed to know how to handle it. And if you don't know how to handle it, then turn your badge and your gun in. What if this means the world to that person? What if this becomes their identity? They don't believe that they're good at anything else but this. This is all they know to do.
Right.
They're not going to risk that.
Right.
They're just going to keep quiet. We call that silent suffering. I suffered in silence. It was burnout. It was PTSD untreated. It was depression untreated. I felt it, but I didn't know what to call it because no one educated me on it. Right. And as a result, it created liabilities that caused me to lose my career. And I was a really good officer. Had I had the information that I learned after the fact, I felt comfortable to go to therapy after I got out of the profession. I learned so much about what I was contending with. Had I learned that in BLET, I would have managed a lot of these other situations way different. Even all the use of forces that I got into, I would have managed those way different than I did because I didn't know what I didn't know.
And I know we're talking about, obviously, officers and anybody in law enforcement that had some time on, but how important is it day one, hopefully we got some BLET directors throughout the state that are going to watch this and or listen to it, but, what would you say to them about, try to add something to your curriculum to start talking about this more and more?
Yeah, it's essential. You got to understand, officers are not dying by the bad guys. Granted, we have some of those, but not at the same rate as suicide, which is an indication that officers are not being adequately trained on how to deal with the aftershock of stress or how to manage stress or how to manage just life in general, all the pressures that come with it. And they're not provided with the tools and the skill sets, so then how can they operate effectively? It's like giving a man or a woman who wants to do this job the power to arrest but no handcuffs, the power to go enforce the law but no tools to do so. It's like it's going to be impossible. And so the training should also equally contribute a therapeutic option that complements or parallels the training that's currently in place. Not to do away with it because it's necessary. It works. Officers are able to eliminate threats that are posed towards them and as a result go home the same way that they went in. But when it comes to now this idea of the social and emotional challenges, they don't have any tools. And so if a young officer can get these tools sooner than later, I think it will help to lower that number or combat that number. I started a curriculum. I created a curriculum called Patrolling Your Purpose for that very reason. It's not in any BLE basic law enforcement training yet, but I always share parts of what I do in that curriculum with everybody that comes to me from law enforcement, men, women, couples, you name it, veterans to rookies that are coming on. I give them those tools so that they have now access to information that they did not know existed because talking about mental health is taboo in their homes, their culture, and also within the culture of law enforcement.
Right. So I think that's one of the hardest things as officers because we're taught all those things in the academy like you were talking about before. We're supposed to kind of take those things in and, just suck it up and deal with it. And I think even as an officer, because you're trying to help the community, you're trying to save lives if it comes to that. And then, how do I say that I'm struggling? How do I say that I'm hurting inside? Because, people are looking for me for help. They're looking for me to come and try to save the day to help them in that, could be the worst moment of their life. So taking that and working with that is tough, I would imagine, for everybody.
1,000%. What does it look like for the help to say that they need help? Yeah. It's like the strong person saying that they need a spot on the rack when they're supposed to be strong enough to lift the rack, you know? But everybody gets tired. Right. Everybody gets fatigued. It's human. It's realistic that we all get exhausted, and we have to be honest and realistic with ourselves and not try to subscribe to a fantasy connected to a reality that doesn't exist, that we can go throughout life like the super person and be strong and lift all the weight without any spot. every strong person I know that lifts heavy weight, at times they keep lifting that weight, they're going to need a spot eventually.
Right. So what do you say to that officer that they're like, okay, I deal with daily struggles, but I'm good. I don't feel like I need anything right now, and I feel like I'm coping with everything just fine.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I wouldn't disagree with him,
Right.
right? And again, the only way I would push against that is if I assess and look at other areas of their life where things are not working out the way that they want. So if an officer's coming to me, and let's say that they were voluntold to come to me, right, because they did something that violated policy, or they got a couple complaints or whatever it might be that triggered the mandate, and they're saying, hey, I'm good, I'm fine, I don't know what this is all about. The fact that behavior occurred, or if there's a pattern of red flags, if you will, that's occurring, then it's an indication that something is taking place that they're not asking for help to address. The other challenge is that sometimes people can normalize stress. They can normalize worry. They can normalize anxiety, so much so that when you ask them, hey, are you okay? Are you something wrong? No, I'm good. I'm good. They'll say that really quick. Sometimes it's easier to say that I'm good instead of having to explain something that they may not even know how to explain.
Right.
And so it's just, I'm good as an easy deflection to keep people away from prying what I don't know or what I'm embarrassed or too ashamed to address. The last thing people want to do is expose themselves, or create some layer of access to their vulnerabilities, which is why the ego is something that's so prevalent in law enforcement, man, whether it's the tattoos or the swole muscles, the cool shades, and the smile and that crisp uniform. And it sometimes can conceal vulnerabilities that we may misinterpret. Like, they're fine. Look at them. They're good. Right. They're laughing. They're strong. They're in the weight room. They're okay. When really they're not. Yeah. And so you just got to look at outcomes. That's what I would use to determine whether or not that person's telling me the truth. How are things working for you in your life, in your marriage, in your relationships, with your children, with your spouse, your personal life. And usually these are things that people are pretty private about. But if there are challenges going on out there, no, you're not good, because all that should be well.
Yeah. And I can only imagine what you see and experience through these stories of trying to help officers, of how much they can really adapt to in life and still function like nothing's wrong.
Big time. And again, it's survival mode. It's the idea of living in survival mode. Right. Some people are addicted to that. They don't know how to take a chill pill. Yeah. They're wired to be always on alert, and that's not necessarily a good thing. The body's resilient, but it will tap out. It will fold after a while. This is why young folks nowadays are catching heart attacks and strokes, because they're so heavily invested in that sympathetic nervous system to keep them alive or keep them safe, when really it may be accelerating or shortening, I should say, their lifespan.
Right. So they're in fight or flight mode all the time.
1,000%.
Yeah. And that's what I really wanted you to come today, is talk about officers. We talk about, we want to talk about mental health in general, but to really, take a deep dive about officer situations. And, I wanted the public to really know that, we don't think we're better than anybody, but I wanted them to really just see from a therapist's perspective of, kind of what we go through, and kind of, so there's a little more understanding. I think any kind of community relations, we all have to understand each other better. And I think that's the key to trying to figure each other out.
Absolutely, Tim. I tell you, the public and police officers are more alike than they're different. And I'll say it this way. Most of the time in that situation, when an officer is coming in contact with a civilian or someone in the public, they're both in fight or flight freeze mode in that moment. I remember in my time, I used to have so many people run from me whenever I did a traffic stop, or whenever I'd get out and hop out, and guys would just take off running.
Because you're all swole up and scary looking.
I guess it might be that little old me, but no, yeah, they would take off running, and during that level of my maturity, or that season of my life, I looked at it as them resisting arrest. They're disobeying the law, and I got to get them now. Now it's like, okay, I'm going to hunt. I was designed to. In my mindset, to make sure I go home the same way that I went in. Yeah. So I had a mindset of, I'm not going to let them get me before I get them.
You took it personal.
Yeah. I took a lot of stuff personal, only because I didn't understand layers to this mental health stuff that I brought into the profession, and it impacted my career ultimately. And a lot of times these guys weren't running because they wanted to be a pain in the neck to me. They were running because they were scared. They were operating in flight while I was operating in fight. Now, I had a couple fighters. Didn't really work out well for them, but but it was survival mode.
Right.
They did not want the consequences that came with why I was out there to investigate or to do whatever I was doing as it relates to my job. And so, the community must understand that, yes, officers have a heavy burden. And I think for the most part, people do understand that, man, cops got a difficult job. They got to try to figure things out. They're coming on the scene, getting information from everybody that's going about what happened as to why they're out there. And sometimes people don't make it easy for them. And then you got people that come from the community, primarily the communities that some might say are over-policed, but these are the communities that may be low in poverty. They have a lot of high incidence of crime. And in that community, kids are being raised by people who are potentially generational criminals in some cases, some households, and they're teaching them skill sets and ideologies and philosophies that are in alignment with breaking the law. And so it's normal in those communities or households where the law is broken continuously, so that when this child grows up or adult goes out into the community somewhere and they're behaving in ways that are consistent with the way they were raised, that encourages them by virtue of ignorance to break the law. When a cop comes and holds them accountable, they don't think they did anything wrong. The first thing they're going to say, I didn't even do nothing. That's the first thing they're going to say, because they don't recognize how they were raised, set them up to fail as it relates to the system and what the system expects. And then it creates that community trust, a tug of war that we've been trying to repair or mend. But if we got people teaching the wrong things, then we're going to keep having these misunderstandings around how people are expected to act out in public.
Is there anything else you think we missed? That's some good stuff. Things you want to add?
Everyone that completes basic law enforcement training was qualified to do so, but everybody that completes basic law enforcement training doesn't make it to retirement. And we got to figure out a way to improve that. Yeah. And they shouldn't make it, if they don't make it to retirement, it shouldn't be because of suicide, is what I'm saying.
Right. Very good. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, sir.
Man, I appreciate you, man. Yeah.